What's so interesting for me too is that I usually have a really bad memory. Like I can't remember what we had for dinner last night. But with my NDE story, I remember every single detail like it happened yesterday. And the only thing I can think of is that that has to be from God because my memory is terrible. But this story, every time I tell it, it's like I'm going back there on that same day to relive it again. It's always fresh for me. But it happened when I was 21 back in 1987. And how it started was my dad was in sales. He'd had a floor covering company and he won a sales contest one year. And part of what he won were these two mopeds, or what we would call scooters now. And we used to ride these things all over the neighborhood. Well, one day I was out riding and I had an accident and I slammed into a tree. Well, the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand and they needed to go in and surgically reattach them. I had never had surgery before. I had hardly ever spent any time in a hospital and I had no idea what to expect. So my mom drove me down and we get to the clinic and we go in and they start to prep me and they start to give me the injection for the anesthesia. And something happened. I had a huge reaction, allergic reaction to the anesthesia, and it stopped my heart. And I physically, clinically died. And that's when I had this whole experience that we now call an NDE or a near death experience. And that's how the whole thing started. You know how you hear a lot of times we hear about a traditional near death experience where the person has an accident like mine or they have something happen during surgery and they physically die and they find themselves floating above their bodies looking down and then they become aware of a tunnel and they start moving down this tunnel and at the very end there's a white light and as they're moving down the tunnel they're met by somebody, typically a family member, a loved one, a friend, somebody who passed before them and tells them it's not your time, you have to go back. So we have never known what is on the other side of that white light. Well, what's so interesting about my experience was that mine started on the other side of the white light. So when I first start talking, I'm on the other side of this white light. So what happened, the second that my heart stopped and I closed my eyes, I woke up and I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. It was this huge, long, long building. It was so long, I couldn't even see the end of it. It could have been miles long. And it was made of white, polished marble, just absolutely gorgeous. And on the right hand side of me, again going all the way down as far as I could see, were these white marble columns, just like you see in Greece or Rome, maybe 20 or 30 feet high, all the way down, beautiful white marble columns about 6 feet apart. In the middle of this building were tables, like just like the size of a person's average kitchen table. And they went all the way down about 6 feet apart. And on the left-hand side were these tunnels. Well, right about then, in my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." Well, I didn't know anything about what a spirit guide was. I had no idea. Nobody had ever talked about that back in, the mid 1980s. But apparently, all of us have spirit guides. And what they do is they help us plan our lifetime. They help us create the experiences that we want to have to learn what we want to learn. And they're with us throughout our entire lifetime. Well, what happened is Alan, my guide, was with me during my entire process of this NDE, and he was telling me everything that I was seeing. So that's how I was able to remember everything so well. He told me everything in my ear. Well, he told me that the building that I was in is called the Orientation Center. Remember when I just mentioned those tunnels on the left-hand side?
Mm-hmm.
Tunnels, these tunnels were made, they looked like they had been cut out of solid marble, like perfect 90-degree doors. But they were black. It was like looking into space. and again go as far down as you could see. And my guide said, look at the next tunnel. So I looked up, and there was a gentleman that was coming through this tunnel, and he was doing this. He had his right hand on his chest, and he was an elderly man, probably in his 80s or 90s, and he had lived a long life. And my guide said he just passed from a heart attack. So every one of these tables that were in the middle of this huge building were two people, and they were what my guide said are called orientation counselors. And every single table had two of these counselors, and they were right in front of these tunnels. So anytime somebody passes on Earth, they go through these tunnels, they go into the white light, and they end up in the orientation center. Well, there was a woman, she stood up, she walked over to this gentleman, she took his hands in hers, and she walked them back to the table, and they sat down from each other. She held his hands the entire time, and she started talking to him. And my guide said, these are called orientation counselors. What they do is they help people remember where they're from. Because a lot of times when we come into a lifetime, we forget where we're from. In fact, I've only met a handful of people that ever had any memory about where we're really from. Because we're not from Earth. None of us are actually from here, because this isn't our home. We're only here temporarily. So that's what these orientation counselors do. They help people remember that you just finished a lifetime, you passed, and now you're back on the other side. Well, my guide said to watch him. So I was watching him, and this orientation counselor, she was talking to him, but I was too far away to hear what she was saying. But he was just simply being told that you finished your life, you had a good, productive life, now you're back home again, you're back on the other side. And all of a sudden, he began to change from an elderly man into a young man in his early 30s. And I don't know, I never thought to ask, why are we in our 30s? I don't know. I don't know if it has to do with anything about Jesus when he died, if he was in his 30s. I have no idea why, but we're all in our 30s on the other side. So as she was talking to him, he began to change back to how he looks on the other side, how he really appears. Well, all of a sudden she was done, and he stood up and he walked off to the right, and he walked between two columns. He walked down 3 steps, and he walked into what I call the gardens. I don't know if that's what people on the other side call it, but that's what it looked like to me. He walked into these gardens, and it was the greenest grass I had ever seen, and flowers and trees and plants. It was absolutely gorgeous. The most perfect manicured garden I had ever seen, kind of like what you see in England. It looked like that. And there were all these people there. And what was happening was all these people, he knew all these people that had passed before him. Family, friends, parents, grandparents, uncles, everybody was there to greet him. And my guide said, everybody has a reunion. Well, what still blows my mind to this day is when I was in that building with the orientation center, all those tables, they didn't have computers on them. There were no papers, there were no computers, there was just, so I don't understand how they knew who's coming through. But they do. Somehow those people, those counselors know who's coming through and when. Because somebody told all these people that this gentleman was coming through. His lifetime was about to finish, and he's going to be coming home again. So they're all waiting for them. And that happens for all of us. Every time we pass, all the people that have crossed before us and all the people that we knew on the other side, they're all waiting for us when we get there. And everybody was clapping and applauding and hugging this man and saying what a great job he did. And what I found out is that the reason that's a big deal is because coming to Earth is a huge deal. This planet is one of the hardest of all the different planets. And when we come here, We all know we're going to go through very difficult challenges. We've all gone through hard times. It's almost like every one of us faces our own Mount Everest. We all have these mountains we have to climb in life. And there are many, many souls, from what my guide told me, who don't want to come here because it is so hard. There's just a lot of things that we have to go through while we're here. And all these people were there to reunite with him and to tell him what a great job he did and that he's back. And all of us will have that extraordinary reunion when we finish our lives. Well, that was the orientation building. And then what happened next is that my guide Alan took me to all these different places on the other side. It was only a small area. I don't know where I was. I don't know what they call it, but he took me to a place that was it was kind of like being on a college campus where they have all these different buildings, and one building is your psychology building, this building's your history building, this building might be your science building. Everything's in one general area. That's kind of what it felt like, that I was in this area where all these different things are going on. And wherever he took me, it was really, really busy. There were people everywhere. So what he did is he took me to the outside of these different buildings. And then he took me to the inside. And he wanted me be able to describe to people what I was seeing. So that's how then everything from here starts unfolding on this journey. You know what, Lauren? I never actually looked. I never turned around. I never, and I wish I would have, but I just didn't. The thing was that during the entire this whole journey he took me on, I didn't even know that I had died. The first thing when I was first standing in that building, when I first got there, my very first thought was, "Oh my God, I had no idea the hospital was this big. I had no idea." So he's taken me to all these different places, and on the other side, they actually have form, just like we do. There are buildings there, and the buildings that I saw, they're so large. We have nothing on Earth that compares to the size of these buildings. So the first one he takes me to is this huge, long building. This again, a kind of like a marble, beautiful building. It was all rectangular building with marble columns all along the outside. So he takes me to the inside, and he takes me to a room that is a round room. It was like a round theater. And on top of me, or on the ceiling, were all these movie screens. And there must have been like 15 or 20 of these, and they were all in a circle. And he said to me, my guide said, "This is the life review." And the second he said that, every one of these screens lit up. And what they were showing, it was like watching a movie of my life at a different time and a different age. Like one of them had me as a little child. One of them had me going to kindergarten for the first day. Another one had me playing soccer. All these different screens were playing parts of my life. And my guide said, we all have a life review. And the reason for that is we want to see if we accomplished what we came here to accomplish. Because none of us come here by accident. And I'll explain more of that in just a couple of minutes, but nobody here is an accident. Well, what's interesting about the life review is that as you're watching these different screens, you can feel how your behavior affected somebody else. And there was an incident that they were playing where there was a kid named Troy who was in our elementary school, and he had something wrong with his legs, and he had to walk with crutches. I think it was cerebral palsy or MS, something like that. And he fell one day in the playground. So I ran over to him, helped pick him up, helped him get his crutches back on. And I never thought anything about that. Like it was just anybody would do that. It's no big deal. Well, when I was watching the life review, I could feel how that action made him feel. I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So it shows you the good things that you did, so you know you had an impact with people's lives. But it also shows you anything you may have done that hurt somebody, because nobody gets away with anything in God's mind. So if you hurt somebody, you actually have to feel how your actions made them feel. And so the life review is the best teacher for the soul. Because if there's a soul who's not very well developed and hurts people, that soul has to feel how their actions made other people feel. And that's how they learn. And that's how they know to do better. And what's so interesting is that one of the primary reasons that we come to Earth in the first place is to learn. On the other side, we can still learn. There are libraries, there are all kinds of ways to learn everything. But it's all what makes Earth different is that it's experiential learning. And it's almost like trying to describe to somebody what it's like to ride a bike for the first time. You can tell everybody what it's like, but until you do it, you don't really know what it's really all about. And on the other side, our lives over there are the only way I can describe it is it's like they're perfect. There's nothing to work through over there. There's no hunger, there's no mental illness, there's no homelessness, there's no war, there's no disease, there's no aging, there's no death. It's a perfect world. So when people want to learn something, they come to a place like Earth because one of the best ways that the soul learns is by going through something difficult. Like even if you look at your own life, if you look back 10 years ago, you think I would never want to go back to that version of me because I've learned so much now to where I am now. And that's one of the primary reasons we come here is to experience learning and to go through some of the tough things that we can't do on the other side. So that was the life review. So the next place he takes me to is another huge building with white marble columns on the outside. We go inside, and he takes me to a room that we would say nowadays looked like a regular movie theater. It was a long room with a big movie screen up front. And he said to me, I'm going to show you past lifetimes. Well, this was hard for me because I don't know if I mentioned this on some of the podcasts you've seen me on, but I was raised Catholic. My dad was very Catholic. We used to go to church 2 or 3 times during the week, and then also on Sundays. So I grew up in church, and nobody had ever talked about past lifetimes. It never even occurred to me it was even possible. What I realized with my NDE is that we have been around forever. Souls, I don't know if it's billions of years. I don't know how long it's been when God created all of us, but we have always been. And of course, we can have past lifetimes. That's what God set up for us. All these different ways to learn and to grow. And I think the primary reason for that is when God created us, He gave us all this kind of like spiritual DNA to want to always learn, to continue to learn, to grow, and to develop. Because everybody I've ever met loves to learn new things. I think as humans, we just like to learn new things. And that's why he set this whole thing up where you can have past lifetimes. So all of a sudden he says, I'm going to show you past lifetimes. And this, what happens is the screen lit up and it was like watching a movie again. But it was me. And the first lifetime was me. And it didn't look like I do now because none of us look like we look in different lifetimes. But I just knew that it was me. And I had a shaved head and I was wearing a red kind of a robe or a gown in a monastery. And my job in that lifetime was to teach little kids how to become monks. And that life occurred somewhere in Southeast Asia. And then the screen went blank. Then it started again. And this was another lifetime of mine where I was, the only thing I can think to call it was a shoe peddler. I had a wheelbarrow, a wooden wheelbarrow with a bunch of shoes in it. And my job in that lifetime was I fixed people's shoes. I was kind of like the town or the village shoe fixer. And I would fix the shoes, then take them back to the people, drop them off. And I was pushing this wheelbarrow on a cobblestone road. And I remember that so distinctly. and that life happened somewhere in Eastern Europe. Then that one disappeared. Then the third one comes on, and it's me again, and I'm standing in a wooden boat, and it's either a lake or the ocean. And I had a bunch of nets, and I was tossing these nets in the water and then pulling them back up. And my job in that life was to help catch fish to feed the village. And all of a sudden, that disappeared. And he wanted me to be able to tell people that we have as many lifetimes as we want to. And it's totally up to the individual soul. Nobody says, you know what, Lauren, you screwed this up. You've got to go back and do it again. None of that happens. It's totally up to the individual soul. Some people like to have thousands of lives, and some people don't. It just depends. It's totally up to the individual. So I thought that was really fascinating. It wasn't, I didn't have all of my memories back because I hadn't actually crossed over totally. So when I was looking at it, they looked familiar, but
Okay.
and I knew that it was me. I just didn't have any memory yet of those in the entirety of those lifetimes. I don't know how to explain that any better, but it's almost like when a person makes the final transition and they're over there permanently, that's when they get all their memories back. My memory wasn't, it was more like he's just showing me these different lifetimes so that I would know that we do have more lifetimes if we want them. And it's totally up to us. Everybody has the option to come into an earth life, or I'll mention in a little bit, there's all kinds of other worlds we can go to, and earth is only one of them. The next building he took me to was this beautiful, I mean, all of these buildings were just beautiful, but this one was gorgeous. It was a big circular building, a huge circle with marble columns all around the outside of it, and it had a big dome on it. There's a building in Rome. I forget what it's called, but it looks like the building that I saw, but just bigger, and it's got this big huge dome on it. And apparently, and I don't know why this is true, but anytime that we want to plan a lifetime, we go to this building to plan our lives. So we go on the inside, and my guide walks me up to a table. Again, it's a marble, white, gorgeous table. And there was a scroll on this table. Have you ever seen those like Egyptian papyrus scrolls? That's what this looked like. It had a
Mm.
blue ribbon around it. And he told me everybody plans their lifetimes. Well, what that means is that none of our lives are accidents. We actually plan what country we're going to be born into. What language are we going to learn? Are we going to have children? Are we going to get married? Where are we going to go to school? Are we going to have a certain career? And on these scrolls, every one of us has a scroll that we write all these things down about what we want to do for a lifetime. And have you ever had the experience where at the end of every year you make New Year's resolutions? That's kind of what it felt like. So I took the ribbon off this scroll and I unfolded it like this on the table. And I immediately could see that it was black lettering and it looked like calligraphy. You know the kind of writing that when you were a kid, you have those ink wells and those ink pens and you kind of write out on these scrolls. That's kind of what it looked like. And he explained to me that we all plan all the major events of our lifetime. And when I went to try to read the scroll, because I wanted to see what was on it, it folded up again. And I wasn't able to read it. And I think the reason was because if I had known some of the things that I planned, I may not have gone through with that because we all have these different reasons for coming here, and it's to learn lessons. Well, right about then, I looked over to my right, and there was this huge wall full of scrolls. And I realized that every single person that was having a lifetime on Earth back in 1987 had a corresponding scroll on these walls. And when we finish a lifetime, we go through the reunion, we go through the life review, we can go back to this building, we can get our scroll off the wall and look at it and see if we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. That's the whole reason we write all these things down on these scrolls. Well, I also looked at that point, I looked over to my left, and when I looked to my left, there was this huge sprawling window, and I could see outside, and there was a walkway. And this is the first time that I saw all these different people. And this walkway was full of people walking back and forth. It was almost like, you know what it's like to go to a big city at lunchtime and you see all these people walking around? That's what it looked like. And they look just like we do. People, everybody looks just like us. They have either brown hair, blonde hair, red hair. I mean, there's every race was there, every ethnicity. And on the other side of this walkway, I saw the most beautiful lake. To this day, I've never seen anything on earth as beautiful as what I saw. It was a round lake, beautiful round lake, and it was so still, it looked like glass. And I could see the bottom of the lake. It was that clear. And all around the whole circumference of this lake were these weeping willow trees. They had all their leaves floating on the surface of the lake. It was absolutely breathtaking. And my guide said to me, he said, everything you like to do here on earth, you can do on the other side. The other side has mountains, oceans, lakes, rivers, plains, meadows, and everything that you like to do here, we can do over there. And I thought that was so fantastic because so many people are afraid that nothing happens when we die. But that's not true. What's so interesting about life on earth is that when you get back to the other side, it feels like you just left because they don't have the same type of experience with time that we do. On the other side, when a person plans their life, it makes it feel like they're going to be gone for 3 or 4 months. But when we get here, we might be here for 70, 80, 90 years, and it feels like a really long time. But when you get back, it doesn't feel like that. So that was the part about oh, I forgot. I want to tell you something too. This is something that really blew my mind. You've probably heard the term soulmates, right? Well, I had never heard that term back in 1987. So when I'm in that big round dome building, Alan, my guide, takes me to an area where all I can think of is it was like a huge library, this gigantic library. And all these books were on bookshelves, but they were all the same. They looked like Encyclopedia Britannicas. They were all kind of purplish, kind of purple color or maroon. And he walks me up to this shelf, and I could see that all these books, they were about this thick, maybe 2 inches, 3 inches thick, and they had writing it was gold color writing, and it didn't go across the binding. The writing went down, and every single book had a name on it. And the one he took me to was called Nina, Nina, in gold lettering. And he told me, that's your soulmate. And he went to explain to me that when God created all of us, he created all of us with a perfect mate. And it's called a soulmate. And that person or that soul doesn't always come with you into every lifetime. But we all have a perfect mate on the other side. So if you're on earth and you're having a lifetime, you may not have planned to meet a perfect mate for yourself because we all have different reasons for being here. And what these books have is every one of us has these books. And inside of it is everything about who we are when we're created, what our lifetimes have been, what we have learned, what we've experienced. And we all have one, and we all have soulmates. And I like to tell people that even if you didn't find what you would think to be your soulmate here on earth in this lifetime, it's okay because you have that person on the other side. They're always going to be with you forever. And we all come here for different reasons. We don't all come here to get married, to have children. We all have different reasons for being here. So that was what I call the building with the dome on it. Just beautiful. All I know is that my guide said we all have soulmates. It's like your perfect mate, but he didn't really give me any details. I kind of got the feeling that that's what you would call like your husband or your wife. It would kind of be like that
Hmm.
kind of a relationship. All I know is that we all have one. And I don't know, my first inclination is that the soulmate doesn't come into your lifetime with you. Because one of the
Okay.
reasons is that how we learn is when we go through interactions with people, how we learn by relating with people. And I think if you had your perfect mate with you in your lifetime, you would have nothing to learn by having a
Hmm.
relationship with them. But when we're here on Earth, whenever we have relationships with people, we all learn things about ourselves. We learn, we grow, we develop, we experience. So I know it's possible that a soulmate can come into a lifetime with us. I just don't know if they do. That's the
Hmm.
part I don't know, and I wish I could have asked that. I just didn't even think to ask. This next part, I think, is my all-time favorite experience that I had there. So he takes me to another building, and this one wasn't it wasn't marble, it wasn't white. It looked like a huge sports stadium, this huge long sports stadium kind of building. So he takes me to the inside, and inside are all these empty chairs. There must have been thousands of these seats. And I remember that every single light was on. It was really bright inside this building. And when I looked up at the ceiling, it was a round ceiling. And do you remember when you were a kid, when you went on field trips and they took you to a planetarium? That's where I was. I was on the other side in a planetarium building. And there was a gentleman behind me. And one thing that I wish I would have turned around to look at him, but I didn't. Just like with my guide, I never went to look at him. But my guide said on the other side, everybody has kind of like jobs or vocations that they have. And it's not because they have to make money to pay bills like we do here. But on the other side, people just do what they love to do. Like the people in the orientation center, they were orientation counselors. That's what they love, and that's what they do. Well, the gentleman behind me, he knew everything about astronomy. He knew about galaxies and stars and planets and he said to me, "Let's begin." All of a sudden, all the lights went off and it was pitch black. And I sat down and he said to me, "When you look at the stars, this is what you see." And what he was referring to is everybody on Earth at our level of knowledge and development. This is what we see when we look at the stars. And he started showing me our solar system. First, our sun, then Mercury, Mars, Venus, Earth, Jupiter, Saturn, all of our solar system, all of our planets that we knew about. And then it disappeared. And then he said, when we look at the stars, this is what we see. And all of a sudden, he started showing me planet after planet after planet. First, there were dozens, then hundreds, then thousands and millions of planets. And he said, there is far more life in the universe than you could possibly know. And I think there were two reasons why my guide took me here to this planetarium was to tell people that life on Earth is not the only planet with life on it. There are virtually billions of other planets. And then the second reason is that he wanted me to tell people that Earth is not the only planet that we can have lifetimes on. There are virtually unlimited. I have always been a fan of astronomy. Even when I was a kid, I remember I would come home from school and I would watch reruns of the original Star Trek with Captain Kirk. I'd always believed that there has to be other planets. This can't just be the only one. So I got really interested in studying astronomy. And just for the sake of your listeners, so they can understand how many planets are really out there, We live in the Milky Way. That's our galaxy. They estimate that just the Milky Way alone has 100 billion planets in it and 400 billion stars. That's just our galaxy. And something I like to kind of share with people to let them kind of know how large these distances are. The astronomers measure distance in space by how far light travels in a year. Because light, the speed of light, that's the fastest speed that we know, humanity knows about, 186,000 miles a second. Well, if we had a spaceship that could travel at the speed of light, and we took that ship on one end of our galaxy and let it go at the speed of light to get to the other end of our galaxy, it would take 99,000 years to get there. That's just our galaxy. And I was also reading something recently about our nearest neighbor. Our nearest neighbor is the Andromeda Galaxy. The Andromeda Galaxy is so far away that it would take 2.5 million light years just to get there. 2.5 million years at the speed of light to get to our nearest neighbor. And they estimate that every galaxy has 100 billion planets. And they think that there are 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. So can you imagine how many planets have to be out there? And one of the quotes that I just love the most is from Carl Sagan. You may not have heard of him. He was an astronomer, and he was the first to say that there are more planets in the universe than there are grains of sand on planet Earth. And that's just like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what that's like. So that was my favorite part, I think, of my NDE. I think it's unlimited in terms of how many planets we can have lifetimes on. And that's something that God did. He created all these different worlds that we can have lifetimes on. So we can spend eternity learning and growing and developing in all these different ways. And one thing that people have always asked me, they asked me, could you see, when you were looking at these planets on the ceiling, could you see any civilizations? And I couldn't, because the point of view that I was at was looked like looking at these planets from orbit. I was too high to look down and see if there was any civilizations there. But I just knew that these planets had life forms, very similar to ours. They all have their own evolutionary scheme. They all have their own development. There are some planets who are far more advanced than us, and there are other planets that are less advanced, that don't have as much technology. And all the different levels of advancement are all over the galaxies, all over the universe. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Can you imagine how many worlds are out there that we can have lifetimes on? It's absolutely, it's unlimited. And I think to myself, when I feel like I'm stuck here on Earth, and I want to know so much more about all these different things, and we might not get a chance to learn that until we, in fact, cross over. That's kind of frustrating. I had an opportunity to talk to somebody, and I totally blew it. So here's the next thing that he took me to. This is also a really fun thing for me, because I know that a lot of your listeners probably like history, and I like history too. So my guide takes me to another building, and it's one of these buildings that is so large I couldn't see the end of it. But it didn't have columns on the outside or on the sides. It had the marble columns in front. And I don't know if you've ever seen the United States Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. It looked just like that. Had all these steps going up to the front and all these columns out front of it. So we go to the inside, and inside is this huge, gigantic library, maybe 20 or 30 feet high bookshelves with all these books as far as you could see. And my guide said, everything you ever wanted to learn, you can learn here. And the library was full of people. There were people everywhere. Some people were visiting. Some people were sitting at tables talking. Other people were looking for books. And he takes me over to the left-hand side of this library. And on the left-hand side were these rooms. They're what we would call today as study rooms, about the size of an average person's living room. So we walk up to one of these rooms, and there's a woman sitting there. She had jet black hair that went all the way down to her waist. She was wearing kind of like a purple robe or a gown. And she was sitting there with her back to me, and she was watching what what today we would call a flat screen TV. And this was interesting to me because when this happened back in 1987, we didn't have flat screen TVs yet. We had these big hulking televisions that had these all these components in the back that it couldn't fit on a wall. So what she was watching looked like a 50 or 60-inch flat screen TV mounted on the wall. And my guide said, "Watch what she's looking at." So I got closer and I was watching what I thought was a movie. I thought she was watching a movie, like she rented a movie or something like we would do. And there was a battle going on, and it was Native American Indians on horseback fighting against United States cavalry, also on horseback. There was this big battle. And I thought, oh, it just must be a movie. And my guide said, she's watching real history. She was watching a battle that had taken place 200 years ago. And I said, how is that possible? We didn't have video cameras back then. How could she possibly be watching something that happened in history? And my guide said, everything gets recorded. And that made sense to me because on the life review, we can see everything about our lives. Somehow, it's a God thing. I can't even comprehend how that's possible. But our lifetimes are recorded, and we can watch them when we get back. So anything that you've ever wanted to learn about in history, you can go to this library, you can go to these rooms, and you can watch on these screens what actually happened in history. And here's where I wanted to tell you about this chance that I had to talk to this person, and I totally blew it. So my guide takes me to another area, and he takes me to a castle just like you would see in England or France or Scotland, these big, beautiful stone-made castles. Well, on the other side, there are all kinds of ways to learn. You can go to the library, you can read, you can take classes, take lectures, you can go to these different rooms and watch history. But on the other side, you can actually go to these areas where these buildings were to see what people lived in during that particular time of Earth's history. So he takes me to this medieval castle, and we go inside, and the first thing I notice is there's this red sprawling carpet throughout the entire castle, and it makes you feel like royalty when you walk in. And that's by design so that you could feel like what people felt like during that period in Earth's history. So we walk in, and on both sides are these huge walls. And on the wall were life-size paintings. And they were paintings of people that were royalty in that time of Earth's history. Like King George, Queen Anne, all these people had life-size paintings. So you could walk in, you could see what they looked like, and you could see how they dressed. And all the way down were these pictures of people who lived in this time period. Well, in front of every painting, there was a podium. And on the podium, there was a book. And this book is about that person's lifetime. So if you're on the other side and you didn't happen to have a life in medieval Europe, but you wanted to learn about it, you could go to the castle, see what they lived in. You could look at the walls and see what they looked like. And you could also read about them in this book. Well, right about then, I looked over to my right, and there was a stairwell. You know how castles back then had those round stairwells? There was a woman walking down this stairwell. So I'm standing there, and I'm looking at her. She's looking at me, and like, oh my gosh, she's walking up to me. So she walked up to me, and she stood right in front of me, and she said, "Is there anything I can help you find?" And Lauren, I said the stupidest thing I could ever say. I said to her, "No thanks, I'm just looking." Who are you? Where am I? I thought I was supposed to be having surgery. What's going on? And my guide told me on the other side, what she loves to do is study history of medieval Europe. So you could come to the castle and you could ask her any questions you have about that particular period of Earth's history. She's like what we would call a professor on Earth. That's what she does on the other side. She loves history. So here's the very last part now of my NDE. So we leave the castle and Alan takes me to a meadow. It was the most beautiful meadow I have ever seen. It was a perfect day. The sky was blue. The meadow was green, rolling hills. And then he left. And I thought I was standing there by myself. So I turned around to look at the rest of the meadow, and there was a gentleman standing in front of me. He had a white robe on. He had a golden sash, like a belt around his waist, and he had sandals that were gold colored that laced up his calves. And I knew that this was the entity that we knew as Jesus. And when I looked at his face, he was different than everybody else I saw. Everybody else looks like just like you and I. Everyone has their own look, their own personality, just like we do here on Earth. But when I looked at his face, there was so much light that was coming out of him, I couldn't see his features. And I just knew this is who we call as Jesus. And he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." And the very second he said that, when he was done, it was like, boom, I was right back in that operating room. That's the last thing that anybody said to me. You must tell them there is no death. So all these years, I have just tried to share my story with as many people as I can share it with, because it's given me so much hope to know that nobody ever really dies. We just go to a different place. And one of the things that I learned the most, that had the biggest impact on me, is helping people overcome the fear of dying, because that is humanity's number one fear. And my whole message is to tell people that your last day is going to be your happiest day, because that's the day you go home. So I'm trying to change people's attitude about death, to not be afraid of dying, because that's how we get back home again. And that was my whole experience.